studied linguistics. I hope my presentation will be relevant. Let me start sharing screen. Okay. Okay, let me see here. So can everybody see it? Okay.
Yes, Professor.
Is it okay? Okay, good. Yesterday I had some trouble with Zoom. I couldn't hear any sound. So today I was a little bit kind of wary. So today actually, as a last presentation, I feel like all of you have already been through a very long day, very rich discussion about different aspects of migration and migration linguistics and how I can fit in. And so I was thinking when Ariane asked me about the talk, I was thinking, oh, should I talk about, for example, immigrant children's language issues? But also I think maybe something a bit more general. So so today I'm going to talk about transnational student mobilities. It does not sound like it has anything to do with language, but I think it's very central to the concerns of linguistics and language. And this is not based on any particular study I've been doing. And currently, actually, I'm studying student mobility from different countries into Japan and Germany to non-English speaking countries, try to understand the mechanism, the dynamics involved in their migration. But today, today's presentation is based on my past 20 years kind of research, as well as some of the literature review that has emerged in recent years, because student mobility has changed a lot. So without further ado, I'll just start. And I think many of you probably have seen this chart. This is actually before COVID pandemic. COVID has really affected student mobility very severely. And this is a chart from 1998 to 2018. It was 21 years, and it really shows the increase of tertiary foreign students enrolled in OECD and non-OECD countries. As you can see, actually the non-OECD countries such as Russia and China or Malaysia, these countries have seen increasing inbound students. So the total number has increased for more than nearly 3 times in this 2 decades. So I mentioned these are tertiary level students, but in fact, there are different kinds of international students that I'm going to cover today. So start from the university students. I think many of us are international students or have been. So the Global Trolley University students probably are the most iconic of international students. And ever since the higher education became necessary for labor market, I think international education also became a very important alternative for acquiring credentials. In fact, in some East Asian countries, just undergraduate degrees are not adequate to advance you or even help you find desirable jobs. You need to have graduate degrees in order to have a desirable job on the labor market. So the weight of credential is one reason that pushes people to seek higher education opportunities, especially when in their own countries, the opportunities are not abundant. And also some of the higher education institutions might not be highly rated, especially with the world ranking and system. Everybody is looking to enter the top ranking and top ranked universities. And I think this kind of sentiment is prevalent, is global. But in Asia, you particularly see that sort of trend, and universities also strive to achieve ranking to climb the ranking, but it also a factor importantly in individuals' consciousness, individual students and families' consciousness, and also the labor market demand. Some employers will also look at the ranking. All these mechanisms have provided a foundation for even for the expansion of international education in recent decades. And also, this has to do with the foreign languages. Employers increasingly value foreign languages. This is not just in Asia, you need to speak English, but also, for example, I had a discussion with scholars in France. Even in French society, now you have to go abroad to study in order to accumulate foreign language, English and other languages, in order to advance you in the elite jobs. So foreign languages have become very important kind of conditions for employability in the globalizing economy. That also drives international migration. And international migration has also become increasingly organized. On the left-hand side, in the left top corner, you can see this Erasmus Mundus program, which channels millions of students, not only within Europe, but also outside of Europe. And in many other regions, you also see these sort of regional integrative programs try to facilitate student exchange and internationalizing education. So this is international education also has become a very integral part of higher education in many parts of the world. So it's increasingly organized. And international education is increasingly commercialized and feeds into a migration industry. And the bottom right-hand corner, you can see it's a picture I took several years ago in China, in Grand Hyatt in Shanghai. This particular study abroad agency occupied 3 grand floors of a convention center. And in there, you can find university, and not only university, but also other institutions from all over the world, setting booths, try to recruit, and that's for multiple days. That's how big this industry is. And some of the so-called education consultancies have even become public, and not only in China, but also at a New York stock market. So this is a very big industry, and I think probably biggest in China, but also big in many other countries like Vietnam or Nepal or India. And a lot of UK universities actually partner with a lot of education agencies in order to recruit students. So this is a very big industry. And international education, why universities want international education? Because international students tend to pay full fees, and more than local students. So I think it's a very big tuition income. So it has become commercialized. And this is these are the different reasons actually the university students are increasingly moving around. And at the left-hand side, I didn't mention, there's this middle-aged gentleman giving a speech. That was actually in China, in China because the enlargement of enrollment, a lot of students after graduating from undergraduates had a difficulty finding jobs. So international education, especially graduate education, became a very necessary next step for them to embark on a better career. So this is all these internal global pressure that make international student mobility increasingly basically expanding. I mentioned there are different phases of international students, and those higher education sectors not only place that sees a lot of international students. We have parachute kids. I think as for those of you who are familiar with migration literature probably know what they are. parachute kids were those parents who, families who deposit their children in California, in Canada, in other English-speaking countries, so the children could homestay in those places and started their international education from as early as elementary school. This was particularly popular among Taiwanese, Hong Kong, and the Korean and some mainland families in North America, mostly primarily in English-speaking countries. Why? Because a lot of those Asian parents consider English acquisition very important. They want the children to have a head start. And also if they can enter those countries earlier, they can also advance to their higher education. So the international education started earlier and earlier. The wild geese families were a term provided, a term that actually emerged in Korea. The wild geese families not only deposit children, but also the mothers. Oftentimes, the mothers also accompany the children in the destination countries. I think even Philippines, and see some of these families. So when I was a tourist in Cebu, I remember I saw language schools that cater to Korean families. So there are a lot of such oops, sorry. Sorry, here I have some trouble here. Okay. I think Professor Brenda Yo in Singapore also studied this phenomenon, wild geese families. And Singapore saw a lot of them. The other phenomenon that involve children, so some of you know, some of you might not know, is the transnational children. So many children will go back to home countries to study. I see in audience there are many scholars from the Philippines, and in fact there are a lot of Japanese Philippine children, Filipino children will go back to the Philippines to study, even though their mother or their parents live in Japan, partly because the Filipino, they believe that the children should acquire English language early on, and so and also sometimes even in Filipino, higher education is good and cheaper than higher education in Japan, and also provide English medium instruction, and so migrant families, after they settled in the destination countries for all different reasons, and very largely for language acquisition reasons, to send their children back to the home country to study. I see that among the Chinese families. I see that among Japanese Filipino families. And there are studies in the UK talking about how some African families will send their children back to Africa because they want the children to acquire the cultural norms of their home countries. They felt that Western societies are corrupting the children's spirits. So they are sending those children back. So we see a lot of these kind of international education that are not typical kind of international education we consider. But this trend is persistent, with the kind of a globalizing tendency, and especially before COVID, this was expanding trend. The last, I want to mention here, and one of the reasons why all those families want to invest so much money and want to send their children away early on to receive international education is because I think the middle class in many Asian countries, I also read studies in Kazakhstan, even in some UK, they feel that this class position is unstable and insecure. So they are afraid their children will sink to the bottom, especially in those very competitive education market and labor market. They're afraid that their students will not be competitive regardless how well the parents provide. So good higher education institutions with good standing is the only path parents see that might provide children a way to a relatively affluent and a comfortable lifestyle. I have to confess, at the very beginning, I couldn't understand, especially because I did a lot of study in China, and I was really puzzled why parents would spend millions of renminbi. I mean, we're talking the hundreds of thousands of dollars to prepare children to go to the higher education institution in North America or Europe. And I said, well, the children might not get a job to return all that sort of investment, right? And the parents told me it was not about investment. If there's any kind of a guarantee that my child could get into a comfortable middle-class situation, such as working in the office at Jack Ma, that's Alibaba's company, I wouldn't be worried so much. So parents would devote all their lifetime saving, so their children could have a chance to maintain a middle class or upper middle class standing. So this is the kind of insecurity, the anxiety behind international education. The third phase that I want to introduce here is student workers. I mentioned that migration industry is omnipresent, and they are the huge drive of student migration. This is again related to language issue. As you understand, language academies are often not considered a tertiary education, and language is oftentimes the very basic requirement to access an education. So for those countries with non-English speaking higher education, such as Japan or Germany or many other places, language academies become the first step for students to enter international education. And because language academy only requires a high school degree and does not require a lot of other academic credentials, it became a very low threshold for students. And the migration industry reached deep and far into rural areas in many Southeast Asian countries, for example, to attract students to study in Japan. And the main migration industry in Vietnam, for example, in Nepal, are mostly about language schools. And the reason why language school can be attractive is because in most countries that offer international education, students are allowed to work up to certain hours. In Japan, it's 28 hours. And in Europe and in New Zealand, in Australia, I think the students can all work 20 hours or 16 hours. And during vacations, they can even work more. So that will solve the financial situation. That became a sales point for a lot of those migration industry. On the left-hand side, is in Vietnam on TV, they're talking about how a language student could make 1,500 to 2,500 USD a month. And on the right-hand side, this is actually I downloaded from Japanese Language Academy promotion site. And they were talking about how this international student support organization can guarantee 100% part-time jobs. That Japanese says 100% part-time jobs guaranteed. And so international students have also been used as low-wage labor. In fact, in Japan's official statistics of foreign labor, international students are counted, and international students occupied nearly a quarter of the foreign labor in Japan's labor market. And this is sometimes people ask me, so why these students become labor? I think students have always been labor in every country. Just think of your own experience when you were in high school or in college. A lot of you work as low-wage labor too. But given that a lot of advanced economies have declining young population, youth population, international students become inevitable workers. Very attractive labor force. Okay, so I just introduced the 3 different kinds of international students just to show the range of international students. The next point is patterns of mobilities from educationally channeled international migration to different temporalities and directions. So first of all, I think the most traditional, conventional imagination of this mobility pattern is educationally channeled immigration. International student visa is not considered immigration visa in the United States, for example, but one statistics show that 10 years after a lot of doctoral students graduated from US higher education, 80% of Chinese and Indians still stayed in the country. And many states, national states, have policies that favor international students' employment. For example, Japan will give international students a year of a grace period looking for jobs. And so in Japan, actually, recent statistics, over 40% of students after graduating from tertiary education stayed on in Japan. So it's a very important migration channels. And Australia has famously tried to channel international students into its labor market. It created all kinds of programs, try to use them as skilled migrants. Why? Because international students, through education, through schooling in the destination countries, acquired the language and the cultural competencies. So they are considered desirable skilled migrants. One of the studies I recently did with a colleague in Germany, talking about the school to work transition of international students, and we do find that the language acquisition, especially in Japan, is very important for labor market, and oftentimes it really determines your labor market outcome. So for Japan, the fit. Everybody talks about the fitness of the candidate. The fittest are the people who speak better Japanese and who take the cultural cues, who understand the cultural implications of Japanese business world. So again, it's very much a cultural kind of criteria. It's a cultural criteria for students' labor market outcome. However, I just want to mention that traditionally, the mobility of students go from, say, Asia or Africa to North America, in particular, like United States and Canada, and also many will go to Australia, and mostly English-speaking countries. Recently, there is a diversification of directions. Not only North America and English-speaking countries have attracted many students. Places like Russia, like China tries to have 500,000 students. It's a one belt, one road policy, as partially to also attract international students. And Japan, obviously, now has close to 300,000 international students. So there is a diversification of directions of student mobilities. And here is a chart. Can you tell the pattern? See all the blue on the left-hand side, there's a very large blue area to petering out here is all Asian students. And the light green ones are all European students. And African students here, these are the green, darker green ones. And there's the kind of grayish blue ones here on the right-hand side. These are Latin American and Caribbean students. And the North American students kind of more scattered, but many of them are in Mexico. Do you see some patterns? I guess you can see that it's very regional. Japan, Korea, and Australia, if we see Asia Pacific, see mostly Asian students. Obviously, the United States also has a lot of Asian students as traditional destination, but European regions see a lot of European students, and the South American countries, Latin America and Caribbean, also see a lot of intra-regional mobilities. So this is what's actually happening. The whole world is moving. Students around the world are moving, shuffling, but there's an increase of within the region mobility. So it's intra-region mobilities. This is the first pattern that we see a lot of students mobility. And the second pattern is actually returns. There's many countries, here I use the case of China, the country that I know the best in the sending country, but Singapore and many other countries also have, even India have policies to attract their international students back to their home country. So many students want to eventually decide to go back to their own home countries. Here is, for those of you who read Chinese, you probably can recognize, but on the right-hand side, there's a lot of text here. This is actually the Shanghai, which is the biggest city in China. The Shanghai's Human Resource and Social Security Bureau's announcement has been for several years. Here, what it says is that if you have this, elite university credentials, a BA or above credentials, and if you can find job in Shanghai, you can get Shanghai's household registration. But if you don't have those, elite higher education credentials from domestic institutions, if you can bring back your degree from the top 500 world, top 500 university in the world ranking, you can also get household registration in Shanghai. Getting household registration in Shanghai means a lot of benefits, including you can buy houses in Shanghai, you can enjoy a good education. And so all in all, the amenities more than compensate for students' tuitions overseas. That's why there is this tendency, there's trend in China. I saw that several years ago, and I did some study of, is the students going to UK to get a degree, a master's degree, and then went back to China. And those, UK has always been a destination, but it had been a bigger destination for Indian and Malaysian students. However, 2012, UK government had a law terminating the post-study working program. So basically, after graduating from the universities, if you cannot immediately find a job, get employment, you go home. So there isn't this period of looking for jobs, allowing to kind of interim kind of arrangement. And guess what? So the Indian and Malaysian students all decided not to go to UK because it's not going to give them career future. but Chinese students went. And just for 9 months or 10 months, they get a degree and went back to China. And I asked them why. They said, well, you go there so that you can go to Shanghai, Beijing, or Guangzhou, those coastal places. And also, by acquiring English in the UK, you have this additional skill and will allow you to find a better jobs. So this is one dynamic that we see in a lot of student sending countries. They try to attract those students back to their countries and providing a lot of amenities. China has been very successful in this regard, India less so. And if you're interested in this, I have some articles here. The last one compared China and India, how they have different degrees of success in attracting those entrepreneurial former international students back to the country. And David Zweig and his colleague also wrote an article, Do Overseas Returnees Excel in Chinese Labor Market? And they found out that returned Chinese graduate students, not undergraduate students, earn 20% more. So that's why students would want to return to their home country. However, what affects intention to or outcomes of stay and return? And Brenda, Michael Bass, and I wrote, we organized a special issue called The Question of Skills. So we gathered a lot of empirical studies on how educated migrants are able to use their skills in the labor market. Because the problem is, even if you get a good education, you might not turn your human capital into career outcome in your destination countries. There are all kinds of reasons. So we wrote about the different reasons, and including the arbitrators who decide what skill is important, and different dynamics involved in the social construction of skill. If you're interested, you can take a look. Here, again, language skill is very important in affecting people's outcomes of migration. Sometimes lacking this adequate, language skill in the destination country dampens their career future, and having the same amount of language skill will becomes added benefit in your home country. That's why people decide on their trajectories afterward. Interestingly, recently I did a survey among a lot of skilled workers working in Japan. I surveyed 600 people. And I guess of all the nationals, right, I try to compare which nationals are more footloose and which nationals are more prone to stay. I surveyed in my survey sample, I have Chinese, Hong Kong, Korean, Taiwanese, Indians, Filipinos, Indonesian, and Vietnamese. Guess which country which two countries are the most footloose? The migrants from two countries are most footloose. Anybody knows? Anybody? I don't know if I'm here to get any questions. Yes, one person said the Philippines.
Yes.
And the other country?
Vietnam.
No, Indians. So the Philippines and the Indians are the most footloose, and this is even after controlling their majors. So they're all like stamps. So that's why. Okay, I'm just. That's why. Can you? Oh, okay. Sorry. I think you cannot do this immediately. I have to exit and reshare. Okay. I think this is actually a more fluid and multiple mobilities. And why the Filipinos and the Indians are more likely to want to stay less than 5 years than any other nationalities. I think, first of all, I think these countries do have a culture of migration. I think the Philippines have this culture of migration, which is quite entrenched. Some scholars such as Mala Assis has discussed about it. But also they have a language advantage, right? Why are they staying in Japan? When they speak good English, they can go somewhere else. So it really matters what kinds of cultural and linguistic skills you have, and really determines your outcomes as well. Okay, just want to check how much time I have. Okay, so actually last mobility pattern I want to introduce here is the fluid and multiple mobilities. And so a lot of people take multiple stepwise migration. Stepwise migration is a term that proposed by Andrew Paul from University of Singapore, National University of Singapore, and she used to be at the Yale and US. She was describing how domestic workers in particular would look for different ways so that they can achieve their goal by going through different countries in order to get a better position. It's called stepwise migration. And what I have discovered, I don't know how many of you are in Japan, Japanese university other than Arian. There are a lot of Chinese students coming from the US or Australia to my Japanese graduate school. And it has happened for several years now, an increasing amount of students are coming. So I was quite puzzled. These students made it to the United States and they don't even speak much Japanese. So why are they coming over here? And so one of my master's students studied this phenomenon. He himself was one of these detours. And he said basically many of them probably felt quite marginalized in some of those English-speaking countries and felt that they were not competitive in those labor market. And also some of them went to the States or Australia and studied Asian studies, like Japanese studies, and many of them were really fond of Japanese pop culture. That's why they came here. So you can see that this sort of especially in the recent decade, increasing amount of international students now are taking different kinds of trajectories, and they feel that they have to fulfill their parents' expectation to go to North America to get a BA degree, but afterwards they can pursue their own interest. And some students will also go to exchange program for some time, and then they like that place, decide to go, and then they will try different exchange programs to find a place they like to go. I think with this infrastructure for international education there, this has become much easier. And then the mobility also has become increasingly fluid. Many international students will stay, for example, in Australia. This is a study by Bass, Michael Bass, one of my collaborators. He studied Indian students in Australia. And he found that a lot of Indian students would work hard in order to get a permanent residency, but the purpose of a permanent residency is for flexibility, so they could go somewhere else, do something else. So this kind of fluid mobility also is witnessed among the educated migrants. Then the last point here, river of many returns. People don't just stay or just return to their home countries or just make one move. Of course, people eventually will settle, but what I have witnessed in Japan and in Germany, in many other countries, is that people constantly will return to where they study sometimes for work, sometimes their job positions will be transnational in nature because of their linguistic and cultural capital that they acquired, in this particular country. And this sort of transnational mobility became also increasingly visible. So I call those business niche that for people with transnational linguistic and cultural capital, occupational niche. So let's see, a lot of international students managed to occupy those niche in Japan, as well as I witnessed this phenomenon in Germany as well. So there are many different kinds of mobilities are going on, becoming increasingly fluid. So I'll wrap up my presentation with some discussion and a conclusion. So first of all, as we have seen, international student mobility is increasing in volume and types and patterns of mobility. And this is undeniable. And people are more likely to have more opportunities to move and more places to move and have moved to different places. And we also see this kind of movement is facilitated largely by the establishment of migration infrastructure. The concept of migration infrastructure is that there are this, we can think of the infrastructure, the road, the bridges, and all these constructions that make the mobility possible. And in order to move students, we also see this kind of migration industry, university agreements, you have a commercialization of international education and the role of education migration industry. I just show you one example. This is the new entries of Chinese, Vietnamese, Nepali students to Japan from 1984 to 2018. And the green and the maroon bars, green bars are the Vietnamese, and the maroon bars are the Nepalese. You can see the Vietnamese in particular before 2012, very, very few. And all of a sudden, after 2012, this sudden increase of Vietnamese students. And right now, with the increase of students as well as technical interns from Vietnam, Vietnamese nationals have become #2 foreign population in Japan. And I did the study of Vietnamese student mobility, and basically it's completely migration industry driven. And most of these students are language students and ended in language academies. And a lot of those language academies are part of this migration industry. They will go to Vietnam and set up language, partner with language academies over there, and the students will learn some Japanese there and pass the N5 test and come to Japan. And it's also connected with the labor market. Some of the kaigo, like the care facilities and newspaper delivery agencies will all also partner with those language academies to absorb those students as low-wage labor. So this is a syndicate of education migration industry managed to send over a lot of students very suddenly. And you might ask why, after 2012, I think many of you who have stayed in Japan or know 2011, Japan experienced the Great East Japan earthquake and also nuclear power plant meltdown. So many Chinese students, Korean students did not come after that year, and they reduced the number. So a lot of language academies were looking for new recruits, basically the sources of students, and Vietnam became a very convenient. Okay, sorry. Can I go back? Okay, so this is a very important role played by migration industry. And I call it education migration industry. And but what facilitates the mobility and affects the patterns of outcomes, as I also have said. So first of all, is really the effect of class. This is I'm talking about social class, not your academic class, and the desire for class reproduction. We see this with globalizing economy, with globalizing labor market, with globalizing higher education and the ranking system. Sometimes I'm very I question the ranking system deeply, and very anyway. I don't believe in that ranking system, and I think it's very flawed, and it's detrimental to a lot to very large degrees, and very unfair to countries who don't speak English, honestly. So. And I think, but that kind of globalizing of this hierarchy really affects a very large range of middle class all over the world to have this anxiety for children to achieve, and for this desire for class reproduction and acquiring English, acquiring foreign languages to stay ahead of other people. So in this sort of rat race, I think international education played a role, and this is the kind of anxiety also prepares international students. And also, you think of international education, it requires resources, and it's only a specific class of people. Even in those poor countries coming as language students, they still have to have some sort of financial resources in order to make the trip. So I think this is really not a kind of equal opportunities for everybody. So this is something, as a sociologist, I am deeply concerned. The other thing is the role of language. I think it really affects students' outcome, not only where student goes, and also whether their credentials will allow them to have market values, and also whether they will be able to enter the labor market smoothly and achieve a career. Okay, I think I will